My rich wife divorced me to save her family's fortune, leaving me with nothing. I was standing under the Texas sun, and the spark from my welding torch felt like the only living thing for miles around. The heat didn't bother me. I spent 20 years defusing bombs in places so hot your boots would melt to the sand. This was nothing. I was fixing a water pump on my wife's family ranch. Well, technically still my wife. For now. The pump was a tricky beast, the kind of job that made other mechanics shake their heads and drive away. Old system, custom parts. Everything held together with the mechanical equivalent of prayers and spite. But I like puzzles like this. They made sense. You find the problem, you fix it, it works. Simple. Unlike my marriage. The ranch belonged to Sarah's family. Had for 3 generations. Big, sprawling property with more zeros in its value than I'd seen in my entire military pension combined. I've been coming out here for 15 years, fixing things. Started when we were dating. Her father would call, I'd show up with my toolbox, and I'd make whatever broken thing work again. Back then, Sarah would bring me lemonade and sit on the fence, watching me work. She'd laugh at my jokes. Said she loved how my hands could take apart anything and put it back together better than before. That was a lifetime ago. Now, the house we shared was quiet, not peaceful quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when 2 people have already said everything that matters and are just waiting for someone to admit it. Our conversations had become logistics. Did you pay the electric bill? What time will you be home? We need milk. The kind of exchanges you'd have with a roommate you barely know. I heard the crunch of gravel before I saw him. Expensive tires on expensive trucks make particular sound, different from work trucks. Softer, like they're apologizing for having to touch dirt. Chad pulled up in his brand new Ford F-250. King Ranch Edition. Still had the temporary tags. He climbed out wearing what I called his ranch costume. Crisp Wranglers that had never seen a fence post, boots so shiny they could signal aircraft, and a hat that cost more than my monthly mortgage. He walked over and clapped me on the shoulder like I was his favorite retriever. Good boy, Mark. Keep those hands busy. Nice to have a hobby that saves us money on repair bills. I didn't say anything, just gripped my torch tighter and went back to work. In EOD, we had a saying, never cut the wire when you're angry. Steady hands save lives. I'd learned that lesson in a desert halfway across the world, staring at enough explosive to turn a city block into a crater. Patience, control, precision. Chad wandered around the pump, hands in his pockets, making the kind of observations people make when they need to prove they understand something they absolutely don't. You know, Mark, you ever think about starting your own repair business? Could make decent money. Not tech money, obviously, but decent. I kept my eyes on the weld seam. The metal was starting to glow the right color. Almost there. Tech money. That was rich coming from Chad. He'd burned through 3 startups in 5 years. Each one was going to be the next big thing. Each one crashed harder than the last. But he wore expensive clothes and used words like disruption and pivot and market penetration. So the family kept writing checks. Meanwhile, I fixed their water pumps, finished the weld, and shut off the torch. The repair would hold for another decade. Easy. I tested the pressure valve. Perfect. I packed up my tools while Chad talked at me about some new venture. Something about blockchain and sustainable agriculture. I stopped listening after the first sentence. That evening, Sarah told me we were having dinner at the main house. Family dinner. Her tone made it clear this wasn't optional. I should have known something was wrong right then. We hadn't had a family dinner in months. But I just nodded, cleaned up, and drove over. The dining room table was set like we were hosting the governor. Her parents sat opposite ends. Chad and his wife were there. Sarah's younger sister. Even the family lawyer, which should have been my first real warning sign. Nobody brings their lawyer to pot roast unless something's about to go very wrong. The air felt electric, like that moment right before an IED detonates, when every instinct you starts screaming, but you can't see the threat yet. We sat down, made small talk, passed dishes. Everything was surface level normal, except for the undercurrent of tension running through every word. Sarah's mother kept glancing at her husband. Chad was drinking faster than usual. The lawyer wasn't eating at all. Then Chad cleared his throat and picked up his wine glass. You know, I've always admired Mark. Really. Spent his whole career working with explosives, risking his life for his country, and came home with all his fingers and toes. That takes guts. Real guts. Everyone smiled politely. I knew what was coming. Chad had to tell. Whenever he was about to say something cruel, he'd start with a compliment, like putting a cherry on top of a garbage sundae. Of course, the problem with specialized skills like that is they don't really translate to the civilian world, do they? Can't exactly sell bomb, disposal expertise on the stock market. But hey, someone's got to do the blue-collar work, right? Can't all be in the innovation sector. The table laughed. Uncomfortable chuckles. Polite agreement. I set down my fork. Very carefully. Very slowly. The difference, Chad, is that my work had value. Not a price tag. Value. I know that a hard concept for someone who's never created anything that actually worked. The room went silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Sarah's eyes went wide. Not with support. With anger. She was looking at me like I'd just taken a sledgehammer to something fragile and expensive. Her father coughed. Changed the subject. Started talking about the ranch. About weather. About cattle prices. Anything to fill the silence. But the damage was done. I'd embarrassed Chad. In front of his family. In front of the lawyer. I'd broken the unspoken rule. Don't make the rich people uncomfortable in their own house. After dinner, I walked out to porch. Needed air. Needed space. Needed to be anywhere but in that dining room where I could feel every eye judging me for not playing along. Sarah followed me out. She didn't look upset anymore. She looked determined. Focused. Like she'd made a decision and was ready to execute it. Mark, we need to talk. Her voice was steady. Professional. The voice she used for business calls. I turned around and really looked at her. This woman I'd loved for 17 years. This woman I proposed to on a beach in California. This woman who cried when I shipped out to Afghanistan and promised she'd wait for me. I didn't recognize her anymore. We need to get divorced. Just like that. No build-up. No emotion. Like she was telling me we needed to refinance the mortgage. I waited for her to explain. In EOD, you learn to wait. Never rush. Rushing gets you killed. The family is in trouble financially. Chad's last venture didn't just fail. It crashed. Hard. There's debt. Significant debt. We're selling the North property covered. But the legal team says the sale will go much smoother if I'm single. Clean title. No complications. No community property issues. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Understanding. The lawyer at dinner. The tension. The way everyone had been looking at me like I was already gone. This wasn't a conversation. It was a notification. You remember the prenup you signed before we got married? She continued, her voice never wavering. The house, the assets, the ranch. It's all in the family trust. You have no legal claim to any of it. The lawyers made sure of that. She reached into her jacket and pulled out an envelope, held it out to me. There's $5,000 in here. Consider it a gesture of goodwill. For your trouble. For my trouble. 17 years of marriage. Fixing their equipment. Being part of their family. Sitting through Chad's endless bragging. Smiling politely while they treated me like hired help. $5,000. I looked at the envelope. Then at her hand. Then at her face. Searching for something. Anything. Some hint of the woman I'd married. Some crack in this corporate efficiency. Nothing. Keep it, I said quietly. Fighting over your family's money would be the final humiliation. I'm done. I walked back into the house. Past the dining room where everyone was pretending not to listen. Past the lawyer, who was probably already drawing up papers. Straight to what used to be our bedroom. I packed fast. Didn't take much. Photos from my deployment. My toolbox. My old dress uniform. Still in its garment bag. Some clothes. Personal items. Everything that was actually mine fit in 2 duffel bags and a cardboard box. Funny how you can live somewhere for over a decade and still be able to pack your entire life in under an hour. Sarah stood in the doorway, watching. She didn't try to stop me, didn't apologize, didn't cry. Just watched with those calculating eyes, probably already planning how to redecorate once I was gone. "Where will you go?" she asked, not with concern, with curiosity, like she was tying up loose ends. "I've got my dad's old trailer. Been sitting in storage for years. Figure it's time I actually used it. That thing? Mark, it's practically scrap metal. Then I'll fit right in." I loaded my truck in the dark. The ranch house lights were all on, warm and golden. Inside, I could hear voices, laughter, Chad telling some story. Life moving on without missing a beat. I climbed into my truck, started the engine, and drove away. Didn't look back. In EOD, they teach you that looking back gets you killed. Focus on what's ahead. Always what's ahead. The storage unit was on the edge of town. Cheap place with rusty gates and security cameras that probably hadn't worked since the 90s. I pulled up to Unit 47, cut the lock, and rolled up the door. There it sat, my dad's old trailer. A 1987 Prowler, faded beige with brown trim, windows covered in dust, so thick you couldn't see through them, tires flat and cracked. It listed to one side like a ship taking on water. My father had lived in this thing for 3 years after my mother left him, parked it behind a buddy's shop, and called it home. He was too proud to ask for help, too stubborn to admit he was struggling. I was deployed when he died. Heart attack at 59. By the time I got back to the funeral, everything he owned had been sold or thrown away except this trailer. I'd paid to keep it in storage all these years. Couldn't bring myself to scrap it. Couldn't bring myself to use it either. Guess I didn't have a choice anymore. I hitched it to my truck. The coupling was rusted but still functional. Aired up the tires at a gas station. They held, barely. Found an RV park on the outskirts of town that charged by the week and didn't ask questions. Parked it in the back lot, Space 23, between a bus conversion that looked older than me and a pop-up camper with a tarp for a roof. Welcome home. I thought. Inside was worse than outside. Everything smelled like mildew and time. The ceiling had water damage. The propane system was shot. No electricity. No water. The bed was just a plywood platform with mouse droppings on it. I sat down on that platform and looked around at my new reality. 48 years old. 20 years of military service. Another 15 fixing other people's problems. And here I was, sitting in a rotting trailer with everything I owned in 2 bags and box. My phone buzzed. Text from Sarah. "Lawyer will contact you Monday with papers. Please sign quickly so we can move forward." Move forward. Right. I turned off my phone, lay back on the plywood, stared at the water-stained ceiling. And for the first time in 20 years, I didn't have a mission. No bomb to defuse. No equipment to fix. No marriage to save. Just me, alone with nothing. The worst part wasn't the anger. Anger I could handle. I'd been angry before. Angry watching friends die overseas. Angry at politicians who sent us to fight wars they didn't understand. Angry at a system that chewed up soldiers and spit them out with a handshake and a small monthly check. The worst part was the emptiness. I'd built my entire adult life around being useful, being needed, being the guy who fixed things. And now I wasn't needed anymore. I wasn't useful. I was just in the way. A complication to be handled with $5,000 and a signature. I must have fallen asleep because I woke up to sunlight cutting through the dirty windows. My back ached from the plywood. My neck was stiff. I sat up and looked around at the mess I'd landed in. This was rock bottom. Had to be. Couldn't get much lower than this. But right then, in that moment, sitting in my dead father's trailer with my marriage ending over a text message, I made myself a promise. I'd survive this. Same way I survived everything else. One day at a time. One problem at a time. One small fix at a time. Because that's what I did. I fixed things. Even when those things were broken beyond recognition. Even when that thing was me. The first 3 weeks were hell. Not the explosive, dramatic kind of hell. The slow kind, the grinding kind, the kind that wears you down one cold morning at a time. I'd wake up at dawn because the trailer had no insulation, and Texas mornings in early spring are cold enough to make your bones ache. No hot water, no working stove. I'd heat instant coffee on a camping burner and eat whatever didn't need refrigeration. Crackers, canned tuna, peanut butter straight from the jar. The RV park had a communal bathroom that smelled like bleach and desperation. I'd shower fast, dress faster, and spend my days driving around looking for work. Craigslist gigs mostly. Fix a fence, patch a roof, replace a water heater. The kind of jobs that pay cash and don't ask questions. I'd show up, do the work, take the money, and leave. No small talk. No explanations about why a guy my age with my skills was living in a $20 a night RV park. People don't really see you when you're at the bottom. You become part of the landscape. Just another guy in work boots with calloused hands. The loneliness was worse than the poverty. At least with poverty, you can make a plan, budget, hustle, survive. But loneliness just sits there in your chest like a stone, getting heavier every day. I tried calling a few old army buddies, left messages. Most didn't call back. The ones who did were polite, but distant. Everyone had moved on. Families, careers, lives that didn't have room for a divorced guy living in a trailer. Can't really blame them. What was I going to say? Hey, remember when we defused bombs together in Kandahar? Well, now I'm eating gas station hot dog for dinner, and my biggest accomplishment today was fixing a toilet for $60. At night, I'd lie on that plywood platform and stare at the ceiling. The water stains looked like continents. I'd trace them with my eyes, imagining they were maps to somewhere better. This wasn't living. This was just existing with a pulse. One morning, about a month in, I was driving around looking for a place to park long-term. The RV park was fine for short stays, but the weekly rate was eating through what little money I had. I needed something cheaper, something more permanent. I took a back road I'd never been down before. Dirt and gravel, barely 2 lanes wide. The kind of road that doesn't show up on GPS out here. Self-service was spotty at best. Just me, the truck, and miles of scrubland dotted with mesquite trees and red dirt. Then I saw it, an old Jeep CJ7, stuck axle-deep in mud near a rusted gate. The gate belonged to a small ranch, or what used to be a ranch. The fence was half-collapsed. The main house looked abandoned. There was a barn that leaned so far one side, it seemed to be held up by stubbornness alone. I could have driven past. Wasn't my problem. Wasn't my business. But I'd been in that Jeep's position before. Stuck. Needing help. Having no one stop. I pulled over, grabbed my tow strap and chain from the truck bed, walked over to the Jeep. The engine was still running. Someone was inside. I knocked on the window. The door opened and out climbed the oldest man I'd ever seen who was still vertical. Weather doesn't even begin to describe him. He looked like he'd been carved from the same red dirt that surrounded us. Deep lines in his face, hands like gnarled tree roots, eyes that were sharp and clear despite the fact that he had to be pushing 80. He looked at me, then at my truck, then at the tow strap in my hand. Appreciated, he said, voice like gravel in a cement mixer. I hooked up the strap without a word, signaled for him to stay in neutral, got back in my truck, and pulled. The Jeep came free with sucking sound, mud spraying everywhere. I unhooked the strap and started coiling it up. The old man walked over. He was wearing ancient Carhartt overalls, work boots that had been resold at least twice, and a hat that might have been olive drab 40 years ago. "I'm Sam," he said, extending a hand. "Mark," I replied, shaking it. His grip was still strong. He looked past me at my truck, at the trailer hitched to it, at the toolbox in the bed. His eyes lingered on the veteran plates. "You lost soldier?" "Just looking for a place to park for a while." Sam studied me for a long moment, not with pity, not with judgment, with something else. Recognition, maybe, like he'd stood exactly where I was standing. "You any good with your hands?" "I fix things. It's what I do." He nodded slowly, like I had just answered a much bigger question than the one he'd asked. "Park it over there," he said, pointing to a flat area near a large outcropping of rock. "You help me keep this place from falling apart, and we'll call it even on the rent. Fair?" "Fair," I said. That's how I met Sam. No dramatic moment. No deep conversation. Just two men making a simple deal. But sometimes the most important moments in your life are the quiet ones. I parked the trailer where he'd pointed. The rock formation behind it was massive, probably 40 feet tall and twice as wide. Red granite, weathered smooth by 100 years of wind and rain. It had a presence. Solid, permanent, everything my life wasn't. Sam's ranch wasn't much. 15 acres of tough land, a few scraggly cattle, a vegetable garden that was more ambition than production, but it was maintained, barely. The kind of place one man could keep running if that man was stubborn enough and didn't sleep much. Sam was both. That first day, he handed me a list. Well, less a list and more an archaeological record of everything that was broken. Fence posts, water pump, barn door, tractor that hadn't started since the first Bush was president. Not the second Bush. The first one. I started with the fence. Posts were rotted out. Wire was rusted through in places. It was a 2-day job minimum, but I had nothing but time. Sam watched me work for a while from the porch of his house. Not micromanaging, just observing. Around noon, he brought out 2 sandwiches and 2 beers. We ate in silence. The beer was cold. The sandwich was basic. White bread, bologna, yellow mustard. It was the best meal I'd had in weeks. "You don't talk much," Sam observed. "Neither do you," I replied. He smiled. First time I'd seen him do it. Good. Hate people who fill silence with noise. And just like that, we understood each other. The work became a routine. I'd wake up, fix whatever was next on the list, help Sam with the cattle or the garden, then work on the trailer in the evenings. Slowly, very slowly, I was making it livable. Fixed the propane system, patched the leaks, got the water working. Sam would come by sometimes while I was working on it. He'd hand me a tool I needed before I asked for it, or point out a problem I'd missed. Never said much. Didn't need to. After a few weeks, he started teaching me other things. We'd be walking the property, checking fences or moving cattle, and he'd stop, point at the ground. "See that color in the dirt? That's iron oxide. Means there's good mineral content below." Or he'd run his hand along a rock face and talk about pressure and time and how the earth remembers everything. Don't just look at the stone, soldier. Listen to it. At first, I thought he was being poetic. Old man wisdom. That kind of thing. But Sam was a retired miner. Worked underground for 40 years before his knees gave out. He knew rock the way I knew explosives. With respect, with caution, with the understanding that if you don't listen, it'll kill you. He taught me to read geology like I'd been taught to read terrain. See the story written in layers. Understand what happened millions of years ago that created what you're looking at now. One evening, we were sitting on his porch watching the sun set over the red hills. He was drinking whiskey. I was nursing a beer. "You ever hear of Texas Firestone?" he asked. "Can't say I have. Old legend. More than a legend, really. There's records. About 100 years back, miners found a vein of red granite unlike anything else. Deep crimson color, shot through with quartz that caught light like embers. They called it Firestone. Sold for a fortune to rich folks building mansions. What happened to it?" Sam took a long sip of his whiskey. The vein ran out, or so they thought. More likely, they just couldn't get to it. See, Firestone sit behind what miners call devil's breath. A layer of stone so hard and so unstable that you can't blast through it. You try to force it, it fractures into a million pieces and buries whatever's behind it. Collapses the whole working. He gestured vaguely toward the rock formation behind my trailer. Old-timers said the main vein ran somewhere through these hills. They tried everything. Dynamite, steam drills, broke more equipment and men than they found stone. Eventually gave up. Decided it was cursed or haunted or just plain impossible. "You believe that?" I asked. Sam smiled. That same small smile. I believe that sometimes you can't take what you want by force. Sometimes you gotta ask permission first. Problem is, most people don't have the patience for asking. They want to grab and take and own. Stone doesn't respond to that. We sat in silence after that, watching the sky turn from orange to purple to black. I didn't know it then, but Sam had just given me the most important lesson of my life. Months passed. Summer came. The work never stopped, but it didn't feel like work anymore. It felt like purpose. I was rebuilding Sam's ranch. And in the process, I was rebuilding myself. I'd put on weight. Good weight. Muscle from labor. I was sleeping through the night. The trailer was comfortable now. Almost homey. I'd even gotten satellite internet, so I could watch movies and listen to music. Sam and I fell into an easy rhythm. We'd work during the day, eat dinner together most nights, then go our separate ways. Sometimes we'd talk. Sometimes we wouldn't. It didn't matter. He never asked about my marriage, never asked about my past. He just let me be. One evening in late July, I was replacing boards on his porch. Sam came out with his whiskey and sat down in his chair. He was moving slower than usual. His hands were shaking slightly. "You all right?" I asked. "Old," he said simply. "Getting older every day. Happens to the best of us. Happens faster to the rest of us." He reached down beside his chair and pulled out an old pair of leather work gloves. They were cracked and stained, worn smooth in places from decades of use. He held them out to me. "These have been with me since I was 25 years old. Worked in mines from Colorado to Nevada to here. They know stone better than I do now. My joints are shot, soldier, but these gloves still got work to do." I took them. They were heavier than they looked. Substantial. The leather was thick. Quality stuff you don't see anymore. "You're giving me your gloves?" "I'm giving them to someone who will use them right. Maybe they'll teach you something I can't." I didn't know what to say, so I said the only thing that mattered. "Thank you." Sam nodded, finished his whiskey, went inside without another word. I sat there on that half-finished porch, holding those gloves, and realized something. Sam wasn't just my landlord or my boss or even my friend. He was a father figure I'd been missing since my own dad died. 3 weeks later, Sam didn't come out for breakfast. I knocked on his door. No answer. Tried the handle. It was unlocked. I found him in his chair by the window, looking out at his land. He'd passed some time during the night. Peaceful. No pain on his face. Just gone. I called the county. Made the arrangements. Sat with him until they came to take him away. It felt wrong to leave him alone. The funeral was small. Me, his lawyer, a couple of old-timers from town who'd known him years ago. We buried him on his land, under a mesquite tree he'd planted when he first bought the property. A week after the funeral, Sam's lawyer called me, asked me to come to his office in town. I figured it was about clearing out the trailer, moving on, finding somewhere else to go. I'd saved up a little money, had a few options. I'd survive. The lawyer's office was above a hardware store, old wood floors, files stacked everywhere. He was about Sam's age, silver-haired and sharp-eyed. He gestured for me to sit, slid a folder across the desk. "Sam came to see me about 6 months ago. Said he wanted to make arrangements. He used something called a transfer on death deed. Do you know what that is?" "Can't say I do. It's a way to transfer property ownership without going through probate. When he died, his property automatically transferred to the named beneficiary. Clean. Simple. No lawyers fighting over it. No courts. No waiting." He opened the folder. "Show me the deed. You're the beneficiary, Mark. He left you the ranch. All 15 acres. The house. Everything." I sat there, unable to process what I was hearing. "Why?" The lawyer smiled. "Because he said you'd earned it. Said you'd already fought enough battles with bureaucrats, and that you deserved one thing in life that came easy." His words, not mine. He handed me a sealed envelope. This came with it. I took it with shaking hands. Opened it carefully. Inside was a single piece of paper with Sam's scratchy handwriting. "Soldier, I didn't find the map, but I left you the clue where it'll be in good hands. You know where to look. That was it. No signature. No explanation. I read it 3 times. The lawyer watched me, curious. Makes sense to you? Not yet, I said, but I think it will. I drove back to the ranch. My ranch. Still couldn't wrap my head around it. Parked the truck and sat there for a long time, staring at Sam's house. My house. The land. The rock formation behind where my trailer still sat. Then I looked down at the envelope in my hand. At Sam's note. You know where to look. I walked to the trailer. Opened the door. Looked around. What would Sam have left me that I hadn't found yet? What clue? My eyes fell on the gloves. Sitting on the small table where I'd placed them the night he gave them to me, I picked them up, felt the weight, the texture, the history, and then I did something I should have done weeks ago. I turned them inside out. There, sewn into the lining of the right glove, on the index finger, was something hard, small, flat. I carefully cut the stitching, pulled it out. It was a piece of stone, no bigger than a quarter, deep crimson red, with veins of crystal running through it, that caught the evening light streaming through the window. Firestone, and scratched into its surface, barely visible, was a series of numbers and a directional mark, an azimuth, a compass bearing. I walked outside, held the stone up to the last rays of sunlight. It glowed like an ember. Then I pulled out my old military compass, the one I'd carried through 2 deployments, the one that had never failed me. I aligned the azimuth on the stone with the compass bearing. It pointed directly at the rock formation behind my trailer. Sam, you magnificent old devil, I whispered. I stood there as the sun set, holding a piece of firestone and staring at 40 feet of granite. And I understood. Sam had spent his whole life looking for this. And instead of taking the secret to his grave, he'd given it to someone who might actually have the skills to do something about it. Not a miner, a bomb tech, someone who understood precision, patience, how to move stone without breaking it. For the first time since Sarah had handed me divorce papers, I felt something other than emptiness. I felt purpose, hope, possibility. I looked down at the gloves in my hand, at the stone, at the compass. All right, old man, I said to the empty air, let's see if I'm as smart as you thought I was. The sun finished setting. The stars came out, and somewhere in the darkness, the stone waited. The azimuth pointed directly at the rock formation behind my trailer. Not near it, not around it, at it. I spent the next morning walking around that 40-foot granite outcrop, like I was doing a threat assessment, because in a way this wasn't just rock. This was a puzzle that killed men's dreams for 100 years. Sam had spent decades trying to crack it and died without finding the answer. Now it was my turn. I started by mapping it, pulled out my old military notebook and sketched every angle, every surface, every crack, took photos, measured distances, noted how the morning sun hit it versus the afternoon sun, where water ran off during rain, where erosion was fastest. In EOD, we called this the diagnostic phase. You don't just walk up to a bomb and start cutting wires. You study it. You understand it. You find its weakness. Rock is the same way. It has weak points, stress fractures, veins that run through it like fault lines. You just have to know how to look. After 3 days of mapping, I found what I was looking for, an old survey marker, brass, half buried in the stone, corroded green with age. I had to dig dirt out around it with a knife to read the markings. It was a geodetic benchmark, the kind surveyors used a century ago to mark mineral claims. And it was placed exactly where Sam's azimuth pointed. Someone had known. Someone had marked the spot as significant, and then they'd walked away. Or more likely, they'd tried and failed. I spent the next 2 weeks studying everything I could find about Texas Firestone. Old newspaper articles, mining records, geological surveys. Most of it was digital now, scanned into databases by historical societies that had too much time and too little funding. The story was always the same. Miners would find traces of the red granite, follow the vein, hit a layer of stone so hard it shattered their equipment. They'd tried dynamite. The whole thing would collapse. bury whatever they were trying to reach. They called it Devil's Breath, the layer that protected the treasure. Sam had been right. You couldn't force it. You had to ask permission. I started running calculations. Angles of approach, depth of penetration, blast radius, controlled demolition theory. This was my language, my specialty. In Afghanistan, I'd once had to defuse a building that had been rigged to collapse. 3 floors, civilians trapped inside, 47 separate charges placed in load-bearing walls. The insurgents had been smart. Pull one wire wrong, the whole thing comes down. I'd spent 6 hours in that building, moving inch by inch, disarming one charge at a time, not with force, with precision. This was the same principle in reverse. Instead of preventing an explosion, I needed to create one, but surgical, controlled, precise enough to crack the shell without destroying what was inside. The problem was money. I had some saved up from working odd jobs. Sam's ranch was paid off, so no mortgage. But explosives aren't cheap. Neither are permits, or equipment rental, or the geological survey. I'd need to prove this wasn't just some crazy veteran's fever dream. I sold my grandfather's watch. Army issue from Vietnam, worth about $2,000 to collector. Sold 3 tactical knives I'd kept from my service days. Another $800. Cleaned out my savings account. For 1,000 more. It was enough. Barely. The county permitting office was in a building that looked like it hadn't been updated since Carter was president. Fluorescent lights. Linoleum floors. The smell of old coffee and bureaucratic despair. The clerk behind the counter was maybe 30. Soft hands. Polo shirt. The kind of guy who'd never done a day of physical labor in his life. He looked at me the way people look at a stray dog. Suspicious. Vaguely annoyed. I need a permit for controlled explosive use on private property. I said, slide in my application across the counter. He picked it up, scanned it, raised an eyebrow. You're looking to blast rock on residential land? It's zoned agricultural. And the blast will be minimal. Controlled charges. Small radius. He looked at my hands. My work clothes. My boots that had seen better decades. Do you have any certification for this kind of work? 20 years EOD. Explosive Ordnance Disposal. United States Army. I handed him my DD 214, my discharge papers. He barely glanced at them. That's military. This is civilian. Different regulations. Different standards. Application denied. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not anger. Not yet. Just recognition. This was Chad all over again. Same tone. Same condescension. Same assumption that because I work with my hands, I didn't know what I was doing. I kept my voice level. What do I need to do to get approval? He sighed, like I was inconveniencing him by existing. You'd need a licensed civilian blasting contractor to sign off. Geological assessment. Environmental impact study. Survey of surrounding properties. Insurance. Bonding. And even then, probably not. We don't typically approve this kind of thing for private individuals. In that moment, I thought about Sarah, about that dinner where she'd told me to sign the papers, about the envelope with $5,000, about her face when she said I had nothing. This clerk was telling me the same thing. You're nobody. You have nothing. Go away. But I'd learned something in that trailer, something in those months working Sam's land. Something in the weight of those old gloves. I wasn't nobody. I was just somebody people didn't want to see. Fine, I said. I'll get you everything you need. It took 2 months. 2 months of calling every geologist in a 100-mile radius until I found one willing to come out for a price I could afford. Old guy. Retired from the State Geological Survey. He spent a day examining the rock formation, took samples, ran tests. His report said exactly what I knew it would. High probability of rare granite deposit. Low environmental impact. Minimal risk to surrounding area if properly executed. Cost me $1,200 I didn't have. Charged it to a credit card I'd sworn I'd never use again. Got the environmental study done. $300 to a firm that rubber stamped it because nobody cared about 15 acres of scrubland. Insurance was harder. Most companies wouldn't touch it. Finally found a small outfit in Oklahoma that specialized in agricultural blasting. $1,000 for a 6-month policy. Found a licensed contractor willing to sign off if I did all the actual work. He was ex-Navy. Understood what EOD meant. Told me he'd cover my back if I covered his fee. $500. Every time I want to quit, I'd pull out Sam's gloves and hold them. I went back to that clerk's office with a folder 3 inches thick. Dropped it on his counter. Everything you asked for, plus my blast plan, safety protocols, and signed statements from the 3 nearest property owners saying they had no objection. He opened the folder, flipped through it. His expression went from smug to surprised to annoyed. "This will take time to review," he said. "Take your time. I'm not going anywhere." 3 weeks later, I got a letter in the mail. Permit approved, valid for 60 days. I held that letter and smiled for the first time in months. Day of the blast, I woke up at dawn. Clear sky, no wind, perfect conditions. I'd spent the previous week drilling holes. Not deep, not random. Calculated positions based on a geology report and my own analysis of the rock structure. 47 holes total. Each one angled precisely. Each one measured to the centimeter. I'd learned something in 2 decades of defusing bombs. Explosives aren't about power. They're about placement. Put a pound of C4 in the wrong spot, you waste it. Put an ounce in the right spot, you change everything. The charges were tiny. Commercial blasting caps. Low velocity. The kind used for precision work. Not enough to shatter. Just enough to fracture along existing stress lines. Sam had been right. The devil's breath wasn't one solid layer. It was a network of microfractures, compressed over millions of years into something that looked solid but wasn't. Hit it with a sledgehammer, it would collapse. Touch it with a surgeon's hand, it would open. I was a surgeon. I wired everything in sequence. Each charge would fire milliseconds after the last. A ripple, not an explosion, like dominoes falling, or pressure points being released. Checked my work 3 times. Then checked it again. In EOD, you don't get second chances. Put on Sam's gloves. They felt right, like they'd been waiting for this. Walked back to the detonator. 200-foot spool of wire. Safe distance. Behind a blast shield I'd built from sandbags and plywood. I said a prayer. First one in years. Not to God, exactly. More to Sam. To my dad. To everyone who believed I was worth something. Then I pressed the button. The sound was almost disappointing. Not a boom, more like a crack. Sharp, short, echo bouncing off the hills. The ground shivered. Just once, like it was exhaling. Dust rose from the rock face. A lot of dust. I couldn't see anything through it. Just a brown-red cloud expanding outward, catching the morning light. I waited, counting seconds, letting the dust settle, letting the rock stabilize. 60 seconds. 90. 2 minutes. The dust began to clear. And there it was. The outer layer of the rock had fractured clean, split along invisible seams I'd calculated but never seen, fell away in sections, revealing what was behind. A wall of stone that looked like it was on fire, deep crimson, dark as dried blood, but shot through with veins of crystal quartz that caught the sunlight and threw it back like embers, like the rock itself was burning from the inside. Texas Firestone. I walked toward it, slowly, still wearing Sam's gloves. Reached out and touched it. The stone was warm, not from the blast, from the sun that had been trapped in those crystals for 1,000,000 years and was finally being released. I stood there for I don't know how long, just touching it, feeling the texture, the reality of it. This was what Sam had been chasing his whole life. This was what men had died trying to find. And it was mine, not because I'd inherited it, not because someone gave it to me, because I'd earned it, through patience, through precision, through refusing to quit when everyone told me I was nothing. I pulled off Sam's gloves and looked at them. Cracked leather, stained dark, worn thin in places. "Thank you, old man," I said out loud. "You crazy, magnificent old man." The wall of fire stone went deep. I could see at least 20 feet of it, and that was just what the blast had exposed. There was more below, more behind, a vein that probably ran for hundreds of yards through the earth. I spent the rest of that day carefully removing debris, documenting everything, taking photos, measurements, making notes. By sunset, I knew two things. First, this was real. This was significant. This was a legendary deposit that had disappeared a century ago. Second, I had absolutely no idea what to do next. I called the geologist who'd done my report, sent him photos. He called back within an hour. His voice was shaking. "Son, do you understand what you found? This hasn't been seen in 100 years. Museums will want samples. Architects will pay premium rates. This is museum-grade material. Installation grade. The kind of stone that goes in Capitol buildings and monuments. How much are we talking?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment. "Depends on how much you have. But if that vein runs as deep as your photos suggest, conservatively, several $1 million. Several million." I sat down hard on the ground. Several $1 million worth of stone, on land I owned, that I'd found in my own hands. Word got out, small towns being what they are. Within a month, I had geologists visiting, stone dealers, architects looking for unique materials, a reporter from the local paper who ran a story about the veteran who discovered a legendary lost quarry. I started small, hired a couple guys to help me extract blocks, set up proper equipment, did it right, did it safe, no cutting corners, no rushing. Every block that came out was perfect, deep red, crystal clear quartz veins, the kind of stone that made people stop and stare. I sold the first slab to an architect in Austin. Custom fireplace for some tech millionaire's house. Got $20,000 for one piece. $20,000 for one slab of rock. I sat in Sam's house that night, staring at the check, and laughed until I cried. 6 months in, I had steady contracts. Museums, government buildings, high-end residential. People were willing to wait years for a Texas Firestone because there was no other source. I kept the operation small. Didn't want to strip mine it. Didn't want to destroy what I'd found. This wasn't about getting rich quick. This was about doing it right. I hired 3 guys, all veterans. Guys like me who come home and found that nobody valued what they could do. Gave them good wages, benefits, respect. We became a crew, a family, the kind of brotherhood I hadn't felt since I'd left the service. The trailer was long gone. I'd built a small house. Nothing fancy, just solid, good bones. A porch where I could sit and watch the sunset over the quarry. Sam would have liked it. 1 year to the day after I'd pressed that detonator, I was sitting on that porch when I saw a familiar truck coming up the road. Ford F-250, King Ranch Edition. Even at a distance, I knew Chad. My crew was working in the quarry. Good men, steady hands. I watched them for a moment, then stood up as the truck pulled into my driveway. Chad got out. Sarah was with him, both of them looking at the quarry, at the house, at the equipment, at the evidence of everything I'd built. The look on Chad's face was priceless. Confusion, jealousy, disbelief. Sarah's face was harder to read. Calculating, always calculating. "Mark," Chad said, walking over with that same fake smile. His voice had that practiced casualness that meant he wanted something. "Good to see you, man. Really, we heard you'd stumbled onto something out here. Local paper. Small world. Stumbled," I repeated. Interesting word choice. He laughed. "Nervous. You know what I mean. Lucky break. Right place, right time. Though I gotta say, it's pretty convenient. Finding this right next to what used to be family land. Makes you wonder about property lines, you know? And there it was. The angle. The play. I pulled out the property deed from my pocket. I'd started carrying it after the newspaper article. Figured something like this might happen. This land was never yours, Chad. Hasn't been for 60 years. It was Sam's. Now it's mine. All legal. All documented. Want to see the survey maps? He didn't. The smile faded. Come on, Mark. After everything the family did for you, years of support, opportunity, seems like you could share a little of this windfall. Call it gratitude. Gratitude, I said. For what? For letting me fix your equipment for free? For kicking me out when I became inconvenient? For treating me like hired help at my own dinner table? Chad stepped back. Didn't have an answer. Didn't have a plan for me pushing back. Then Sarah moved forward. Smooth. Practice. Using that voice she'd use 100 times to close deals for her family. Mark, she said softly, regardless of how things ended between us, regardless of the misunderstandings, deep down we were still family, still partners in a way. Maybe we could work something out. Business arrangement. Fresh start. I looked at her, really looked, saw the same calculation in her eyes that I'd seen that night on the porch when she'd handed me the divorce papers. The same cold assessment. She wasn't here for me. She was here for the stone. I looked past her, at my crew working the quarry, at the house I'd built, at the land I'd earned. Then I looked back at her, and for the first time since she'd left me, I felt nothing. No anger, no hurt, just a kind of sad clarity. When you decided to divorce me, you made a choice. You decided that both me and this land were worthless. Turns out you were wrong. About the land. The pause hung in the air. Heavy. Final. Sarah's face went white. Then red. She opened her mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. But there was nothing to say. We both knew it. I put Sam's gloves on. The same ones that had held the clue. The same ones I wore every day when I worked the stone. Walked past both of them without another word. Headed down to the quarry where one of my guys was training a new hire. Young vet, 24. Still had that lost look I'd seen in my own mirror. I put my hand on his shoulder. Look here, I said, pointing to the stone face. See that vein? That crystalline structure? Don't just look at it. Listen to what it's telling you. The stone will teach you if you give it time. Behind us, a truck rolled through carrying a single massive slab of firestone, 14 feet long, 6 feet wide, 4 inches thick, perfect crimson with crystal veins running through it like lightning frozen in rock. That slab was worth more than all the debt that had destroyed my marriage, more than Chad's failed startups, more than the $5,000 Sarah had offered me to disappear quietly. I heard Chad's truck start up, heard it drive away, didn't turn around, didn't wave, didn't care. My guy was studying the stone face, really studying it, the way Sam had taught me, the way I was teaching him. You see it? I asked. Yeah, he said slowly. I think I do. Good. That's good. Now let's get to work. The sun was setting, painting the sky red and gold. The firestone caught the light and glowed like it was alive, like it was happy to finally be free. I pulled out the old piece of firestone Sam had hidden in his gloves, held it up to the dying light. It blazed like an ember. We found it, old man, I said quietly, just like you knew we would. That night, I sat on my porch. My crew was inside playing cards and giving each other grief. Their laughter carried through the open windows. Good sound. Human sound. I thought about Sam, about my dad, about everyone who believed I was worth something when I couldn't see it myself. Thought about Sarah and Chad driving away, probably arguing, probably tried to figure out if there was any legal angle they'd missed. Thought about the stone, about patience, about asking instead of taking. And I realized something. I hadn't been searching for treasure. I'd been searching for purpose, for proof that I mattered, that my skills had value, that I was more than the guy who got thrown away when he became inconvenient. The stone was just stone, beautiful stone, valuable stone, but still just stone. What I'd actually found was something else. Self-respect, brotherhood, a home, the kind of wealth that can't be measured in dollars. I raised my beer to the sunset, to Sam, to second chances, to everyone who'd ever been told they were worthless and proved the world wrong. Then I went inside to join my crew. The cards weren't going to deal themselves. And the stone? The stone would still be there tomorrow. It had waited 100 years. It could wait one more night.